Good evening, Americans, and welcome to the Ed Show live from New York. Let's get to work.
We need to get the answers, and we need to get them soon.
This as yet unfathomed mystery.
The Malaysian authorities have refocused their investigation into the crew and passengers on board.
The nature of the search has changed.
This was not an accident. It was an intentional, deliberate act to bring down this airplane.
Consistent with deliberate action by someone on the plane.
You're going to have to do a thorough investigation on everyone on the airplane.
Despite media reports that the plane was hijacked, I wish to be very clear. We are still investigating all possibilities.
Good to have you with us tonight, folks. Thanks for watching. Well, everybody's done this story except the Ed Show. So I'm going to jump in tonight. It's been 10 days since the Malaysia Airlines flight number 370 dropped off the face of the map off of radar in the Gulf of Thailand. It's a pretty remote place. We all know that. Now, I've been a pilot since 1988, and I've listened to all these theories, and I've listened to everything that's gone on. So since everything is on the table tonight, everything's on the table with the Ed Show. I have a theory about this, and I'm going to tell you what I think happened to the Boeing 777. First, here's NBC News' Tom Costello with the latest.
More than 10 days since Flight 370 disappeared, and the mystery still dominates the world headlines. The last satellite signal received from the plane somewhere along these two arcs running to the north and south, up to 7 hours from the plane's last known radar hit off Malaysia's west coast. But half a dozen countries in Central Asia have already said the plane never appeared on their radars. Further south, the Indian Ocean, 28 million square miles of water.
What we are going through here, ladies and gentlemen, is being monitored across the world, and it may change aviation history. I think it's lessons to be learned for everybody.
Over the weekend, Malaysian police searched the homes of Captain Zahiri Shah and First Officer Farid Hamid, confiscating the sophisticated flight simulator in Captain Shah's home, looking for any evidence he might have practiced flying unusual routes. Also this morning, the pilot was known to be a supporter of Malaysia's political opposition, seen here wearing a T-shirt that reads, "Democracy is dead." Meanwhile, NASA tells NBC News it's checking images from satellites and the space station for any signs of the plane. But many aviation experts believe it's highly unlikely the 777, with a wingspan two-thirds the size of a football field, could have been stolen and flown undetected to another country.
So we're talking about a very, very large airplane. If it goes over land where there are people are going to see it. There's going to be comment about it.
Still, with so little to go on, the Indian Navy has now suspended its search, and other countries may be forced to do the same.
How much more can they afford to put into this search before they have to give it up because they just won't have the resources to be able to pay for it?
Well, I believe that there was foul play involved with this event. I don't think that there was any malfunction or any electrical fire. Now, we know the plane made a sharp left turn and flew into the Straits of Malacca. We know that this has taken place. That's the last detected by military radar. We know that the plane continued to fly for over 7 hours. The jet made contact at 8:11 a.m. local time with a commercial satellite operated by a British company. The latest information shows that the plane could have traveled these two paths, as our report had just a moment ago. That's a possibility. It's also a possibility the plane would have landed. Now, this is a massive search area. It spans over 11 different countries and remote stretches of ocean, millions of miles. Okay. The transponder in the plane was deliberately switched off. Here's what a transponder is. This is the cockpit of my Grand Caravan. This is what I fly. This is the navigation system right here, the Garmin 530. And this is the transponder, if I may show you this. The transponder is squawking 1200 right now. That means I'm flying VFR. Anybody who flies visual flight rules, if you want to use a transponder, you squawk 1200. Now, a squawk code is going to be put in there. You're going to be told by the controller, go to 0466, and that's for radar identification and location, okay? who the plane is and where the plane is as far as altitude is concerned. Now, above 18,000 feet, and that's where this commercial flight was flying, you have to have two of these. It's regulation. You going to tell me that both of them malfunctioned? You're going to tell me that just both of them happen to be turned off? Somebody turned these off. And that leads us to believe that the plane was clearly manipulated, whether it be by the pilots or somebody else who may have commandeered the cockpit. Bottom line here is that, let me give you an example on the squawk. If I'm going into Minneapolis and I say this is Caravan 208 Tango Romeo, I'm at 5,500 inbound with the ATIS. The controller's going to come back to me and he's going to give me a squawk code, 8 Tango Romeo, squawk 0466, or whatever the number might be. As soon as I put 0466 in there, they're going to know who I am, where I am, how high I am, and that's the way it is. You go above 18,000 feet, everybody sets their altimeter at 2992, and you're given a squawk code. No pilot has ever been instructed to turn off their transponder above 18,000 feet. And if you do have some type of malfunction, if the transponder is giving false information, or if it's broken or not reading correctly, the controller is going to come back and tell you, you got to get below 18,000 feet. Well, none of that happened. All of a sudden, these are turned off. Somebody was told to turn them off, or the pilot did it himself. So that's how a transponder operates. Now, I think the plane, I believe it landed somewhere. If a hijack situation is going to take place, why would they fly all over the place? Why would you hijack a plane unless it's a suicide mission, which I don't think it is? If the hijacker was going to crash the plane, why in the world would he fly for 7 hours? And let me tell you something, folks. It's not hard to build a landing strip out in the middle of nowhere. The military did it all the time during the Vietnam War. Now, this is a landing strip at my fishing lodge up in Canada. Let's do a little Google Earth here. This is a 3,300-foot gravel strip in the middle of nowhere. The closest thing to that is some 70 miles. Fact of the matter is, you know what you got to have to build one of these Hummers? You need a couple of bulldozers and you need a rock crusher. If you've got a well-funded operation that is planned to hijack, that wants to put this aircraft down in a remote location, oh, it can be done. There's no question it can be done. The Boeing 777 needs a runway length of about 5,000 feet to land. It may need a hell of a lot more than that to take off. But to put that baby down on a hard surface, on a gravel surface, oh yes, it can be done. And this aircraft can also fly below radar detection. So the hijacker very clearly could have taken over the aircraft, put it down on the deck, flown it underneath any kind of radar, and put it down on a planned place on the face of the earth that might be a remote location that was pre-planned. Now, there's 634 runways within the range that the flight of this 370 could have landed. Wow, that's a lot of targets. Anybody covered this story about just how many remote landing strips there are in Thailand? We had quite a few of them in the Vietnam War. They're probably still around unless somebody cut the grass. Now, there was also plenty of places a 5,000-foot runway could have been built along this search path. It could have even landed at a remote stretch or in a desert somewhere. Yeah. For example, back in 1970, 4 jets were hijacked by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They were flown and landed in a remote desert airstrip in Jordan. It's very possible Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 is sitting on the ground in some remote part of the world and nobody can find it. Very possible. I don't care how big this aircraft is. And oh, by the way, no one's really talked about a water landing. If it's a hijack situation, and I believe that it was, and this guy just wanted to pull a Southwest Airlines, you want to get away? There's no doubt he could have put it down on any of these remote islands. I believe that we did see an airplane land in the Hudson River successfully some years ago. Sully was a hero for putting it down. Of course this aircraft could have landed on water near an island. Everybody swim for yourself. There's all kinds of things that could have gone wrong here. After all, we're saying everything's on the table. Bottom line here is, I believe that that aircraft was manipulated. I don't believe that that aircraft had any kind of malfunction whatsoever. I don't think it was a suicide mission. I think this is a well-funded, high-tech hijack operation, and it's sitting somewhere in the jungle. And yeah, I think they carved out a strip for it. And yes, the pilot could have been, with all that experience, able enough to fly VFR below 3,000 feet, below detection, and put that baby right down where he wants to put it down. He's got a flight simulator in his house, and he wouldn't know how to fly VFR on a big jet like that? Come on. Anything's on the table, right? Get your cell phones out. I want to know what you think. Tonight's question. Do you think this plane will ever be found? Text A for yes, text B for no to 67622. You can always go to our blog at ed.msnbc.com. We'll bring you the results later on in the show. Let me bring in retired airline captain Tom Bunn, who used to fly the Boeing 767s, and also with us tonight is aviation consultant Scott Hamilton. Gentlemen, good to have you with us tonight. Tom, I want to focus with you first, if I may. Why would anyone turn off a transponder?
There's no reason to turn off a transponder. You would only switch to the other one. You're not going to turn it off. Not unless you're forced to for some reason. No pilot's going to do it.
Switch to the other transponder. There has to be redundancy in the system. There has to be two above 18,000 feet.
Right.
So it really doesn't lend itself with a rigorous maintenance schedule, which of course the airlines have, that two transponders would malfunction at once.
Well, no, they would know that they're operating before they take off. And air traffic control was watching them on the one. And if they lost one, air traffic control could have told them. They could have switched to the other one and checked that one out. Something else happened.
Okay. Why would a plane fly so long and on a suicide mission?
It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, if it's a suicide mission, they're going to do it right now, aren't they?
First of all, what I was told was these pilots were put together on this flight by the airline. They didn't have any collusion about this. So let's say you got two pilots in the cockpit and one says, hey, by the way, I'd like to kill myself today. Are you going to go along with that? Even if you had a gun, you can't fly the airplane with a gun to one guy's head while you operate the plane with the other hand. It's not going to work.
Now, the attitude of the aircraft, the changing of the altitude, automatic pilot wouldn't do that unless it was pre-programmed.
No, that's right.
Okay, so that even the radar lends us to believe, the radar tracking of it, the different altitudes that it had, tells us that the aircraft was manipulated.
Well, there was one thing that was interesting to me, the idea that it went to 45,000 feet. Now, that's very unusual, and whether that is accurate or not with the military radar, don't know, but if that was the case, that brings up some other interesting possibilities.
Could easily been a struggle in the cockpit, pull back the yoke. You never know.
Well, the other possibility is, I had this fantasy when I was flying, was if I had a hijacking, maybe I'd climb to 40,000 feet, 45,000 feet. At that point, when you depressurize the airplane, anyone not only oxygen, but pressurized oxygen that's forced into your body has 15 seconds maximum before they become incapacitated.
Okay.
So that's what you could do to a hijacker.
So why would the captain do that to the crew?
If he had the hijacker where he knew where he was, even in the cockpit, if he climbed to 45,000 feet, depressurized the plane, the hijacker could be incapacitated in 15 seconds unless he could get a mask on.
Okay. So whoever manipulated the cockpit was smart enough to turn off the transponder, but wouldn't that person be smart enough to realize that you're climbing to 45,000 feet? So that would kill that theory from my perspective.
Yeah, except that we do have that record that supposedly that they went to 45,000 feet.
Sure.
Don't know why. Don't know if that's correct either.
Scott, I want to ask you, good to have you with us tonight. Do you see this as a possible hijacking?
Well, I thought from day two that this was actually a criminal act. As Tom pointed out, the transponder was turned off. All two transponders were turned off. The ACARS was turned off, and that's that system that monitors the health of the airplane and sends it back to the airline. The 777 has 5 radios, 3 VHF radios, 2 HF radios, the 2 transponders. The ACARS, a 777 instructor tells me, is tied to the number 2 VHF radio. You turn that off, you turn off ACARS. This was not an accident. This was not a mistake. This was not an electrical failure to blow out all 5 of those radios and the transponders. So I think this was a criminal act.
And also a lot, and I don't know if these pilots did this or not, but many pilots who do overseas flights over a lot of water carry a satellite phone with them. In case everything fails, they pull out a remote satellite phone and they can get to somebody to say what's going on here. If they were trying to save the aircraft and if it lost all electrical and had been incapacitated, I'm surprised that a satellite phone wouldn't come into play. Your thoughts?
Well, I have no idea about that. And let's remember that the distance between Kuala Lumpur and then landfall at Vietnam really isn't all that long over water. But the one thing that Tom did not mention is the prospect that if this was indeed an event propagated by one of the two pilots, you just wait until the other pilot steps out of the cockpit to go to the bathroom, and then you lock them out. That happened with the Silk Air pilot suicide. That happened with the Egypt Air pilot suicide. So we don't know whether this was a cockpit intrusion that forced the pilots to do something. We don't know whether this was the one pilot or the other instigating this event. And we may never know.
I want your thoughts on the length of flight. I mean, we know that aircraft took off with so many pounds of fuel. It burned so many pounds per hour. It should be an easy calculation from the last point of its known position how far it could fly. And if it goes down to a low altitude, it's going to burn more fuel, but it still has a hell of a long way to go to reach a destination and get below radar. What do you think?
Yeah, the idea of what I loosely term this joyride is the most perplexing part of this when we talk about the prospect of a hijacking or a pilot suicide.
Yeah.
The only thing that I could think of if this were a pilot suicide type of event would be that he wanted to burn off or dump all the fuel, but it doesn't appear that he was dumping it to eliminate any prospect of a fireball if and when the airplane crashed.
Yeah.
If it were a hijacking, I've got a little fiction theory here that this could be Al-Qaeda or some other group that we know has wanted to test security procedures to be able to get back into an airplane illegally and take one over. But if this was a test run, then they don't want to tell anybody about that, and they want the airplane in a location where it just adds to the mystery. Absolutely.
And I do believe that this is a hijacking. I think it's organized, and I think it's on the ground. Tom, Captain, I'd like your thoughts on the length of flight after its last location.
I'm not sure what you're looking for there, but we know that it flew for about 7 hours. It's got a lot of places it could have gone. And then, yes, after it's gone to a certain point, in order to get by the radar, you can go down. You still got fuel to do that.
So they could, and this is something that I think needs to be pointed out finally. This aircraft has all the capability for long distance at low altitude to avoid radar.
Well, you could save the fuel by going outside of radar contact.
Sure.
And then if you've planned this thing and you know where the radar is, then you go down first and you go underneath it. This is the kind of thing we did in Europe when I was in the Air Force. We were trained to fly down below the radar in order to deal with our missions.
All right. An experienced pilot could do that. Tom Bunn, Scott Hamilton, great to have both of you with us tonight. I appreciate your time. Remember to answer tonight's question there at the bottom of the screen. Share your thoughts on Twitter at Ed Show and on Facebook. We want to know what you think. Coming up, we continue our series, Fighting Chance American Steel. Tonight, I'm talking to President of the United Steelworkers International, Leo Gerard. He'll tell us why bad trade deals are crushing America's steel industry and the challenges ahead. But first, beer, politics, and the St. Patrick's Day Parade. Trenders is up next. Stay with us.